Most SQL Server tutorials skip the crucial first step, proper setup. Today, we're fixing that. I'll be showing you the exact process that lets you set up a complete SQL Server environment in less time than it takes to order lunch. It works for complete beginners, requires zero prior experience, and will have you writing queries in minutes. One of the best ways to learn is by doing, and I've got a GitHub repository with a sample code you can use to set up your SQL Server environment and write your first query. The link is in the description below. I've spent over 20 years as a database engineer and made every setup mistake possible, so you don't have to. The first step of installing SQL Server is to download the installer. Head on over to the SQL Server Downloads page to get the installation package. The link is in the description. Select the Developer Edition. It's a feature-rich, fully equipped environment packed with all the tools you need, and it's perfect for learning and development. You'll be installing a SQL Server from the command line while covering all the essentials, the basic options, service accounts, authentication modes, and file locations. Navigate to your Windows Download folder. Double-click the installer to execute it. When you're asked if you want to allow the app to make changes to your device, select Yes. The installer will give you the option of selecting a basic, custom, or download media installer type. Select the download media option. Use the default settings of English language and ISO package type. You can set a different download location if you choose. Click the download button. The installer will download the SQL Server image file. Select Open Folder after the download completes. Right-click on the image file and select Mount. SQL Server will be mounted to the available drive on your machine. That is normally the D drive. We are going to be keeping our SQL Server installation simple and streamlined. If you're new to SQL Server or just want the smoothest setup possible, you're in the right place. We'll go through the entire installation from start to finish, and here's the twist. We're doing it all from the command prompt. Now, if the command prompt sounds intimidating, don't worry. I'll guide you through every step and explain exactly what each command does, so you know what's happening at every stage. Using a command prompt actually gives you way more control over the installation process, and it's faster and more efficient than traditional installers once you get the hang of it. Open Windows Terminal by pressing the Windows and the X key at the same time, and that will open the Windows context menu. Select Terminal Admin to open Windows Terminal as an administrator. System-level installations, such as SQL Server, require that commands are executed as an administrator. After Windows Terminal opens, navigate to the D drive by entering this command. That is where the SQL Server installation media is located. We will be using this command to install SQL Server from the command line. But first, let's understand how to use each of these parameters. The queue parameter allows you to run the installation without any user interaction with the setup wizard. This makes it a silent and automated process. The action parameter tells the installer exactly what tasks to execute, whether it's installing a new instance, adding features, or repairing an existing installation. In this case, we're installing a new instance of SQL Server. The features parameter is set to SQL Engine. This parameter is used during SQL Server installation to specify that you want to install the core database engine. The SQL Engine feature is the heart of SQL Server. It provides the essential database engine that stores, processes, and secures your data. The instance name parameter sets a distinctive name for your SQL Server instance, enabling you to identify and connect to it easily, especially when running multiple instances on the same machine. The SQL Service Account parameter is a critical component when installing SQL Server. This parameter allows you to set the Windows account that the SQL Server service will use for its operations. It's essential for defining security and permissions. The SQL Service startup type parameter ensures that the SQL Server service starts automatically whenever Windows starts. This parameter allows the installation to proceed without any interruptions to the installation by acknowledging the license terms. If this parameter is not included, then the installation will fail with an error message. Like the license terms parameter, this parameter ensures that the privacy statement notice is accepted and doesn't interrupt your installation. The SQL sysadmin accounts parameter gives your Windows account administrative rights to SQL Server. The remaining parameters are how you set the location where SQL Server will store data, log, and backup files. Although SQL Server can set them to their default location, you should set an alternate location to follow best practices. The install SQL data directory parameter sets the root location where all SQL Server files are stored. The remaining parameters set subdirectories within this root directory. The SQL user database directory specifies the subdirectory where your user databases will be stored, ensuring that your data is secure and easily accessible. It's stored in an MDF file, and that is the primary file in SQL Server databases. It acts as the central repository containing the core data, including tables, views, store procedures, and the database schema itself. The SQL user database log directory sets the subdirectory for user database log files. Transaction logs contain records of all database modifications made by each transaction. This ensures that SQL Server can recover the database to a consistent state in case of failure. The SQL temp database directory parameter sets the subdirectory for the temporary database files. The tempdb database is used for temporary storage requirements in SQL Server. This can include temporary tables, store procedures, and other temporary workspaces. And finally, the SQL backup directory parameter sets the subdirectory for user database backup files. SQL Server backup files are critical for data protection, recovery, and business continuity. They allow you to restore your database to a previous state in case of data loss, corruption, or other disasters. Now that you have a basic understanding of how to use each of these parameters, let's review their impact when you execute the command and install SQL Server. Give your SQL Server instance a name. The name I have chosen indicates the SQL version and the environment. Names should be descriptive and purposeful. Assign the service account that will be used to run SQL services. Using the NT Authority Network Service account is a good option because it is a built-in Windows account with limited privileges. It can access network resources using the computer's credentials. You can opt to not start the SQL Server service on startup. However, there are steps involved to start it manually that go beyond this beginner's level tutorial. Set your Windows username as a sysadmin account to give you administrative permissions for SQL Server. You can set the SQL file locations to any location that you choose, or you could opt to not include these parameters and the installer will set them to the default location. This command sets up a minimal environment to get you up and running with SQL Server in no time. It's perfect for quickly diving into the essentials. But hold on, there's much more to explore. SQL Server offers a vast array of commands that allow you to fine-tune and customize your installation to suit your specific needs. SQL Server extends far beyond just the SQL engine. Stay tuned for future videos where we'll dive into building a more robust and comprehensive SQL environment, unlocking its full potential. After you have altered the command to install your SQL Server instance, paste the command into your command prompt. Remember, you should be on the mounted drive where the SQL Server installation media is located. Why waste time clicking through endless installation wizard screens when you can have SQL Server installed in just a few minutes with a single command. Using the command line, you can swiftly execute a precise setup personalized to suit your needs. No more sifting through unwanted configuration options. Just a smooth, streamlined process that gets your SQL Server up and running in record time. Verify the SQL Server service is running by entering this command in the command prompt. The state is set to running, so our SQL Server has been installed and the service is running. When it comes to SQL Server, an IDE integrates various tools and functionalities that are essential for writing, testing, and managing your SQL code. An IDE is designed to make your SQL Server experience smoother, more efficient, and far more productive. IDEs offer code completion to help you write queries faster, debugging tools to instantly identify and flag errors, a visual interface to manage your tables, and more. These are some of the top IDE choices for SQL Server. SQL Server Management Studio is a comprehensive dedicated tool specifically for SQL Server. Visual Studio Code is lightweight and versatile, especially powerful with the right SQL extensions. And Azure Data Studio is great for both on-premise and cloud environments. I'm going to walk you through the installation and configuration of both Visual Studio Code and SSMS, so you can hit the ground running. For beginners, I highly recommend going with Visual Studio Code. The learning curve is much smoother, making it a fantastic entry point into the world of SQL. You are now ready to use Winget to install both Visual Studio Code and SSMS directly from the command line. This method is quick and efficient, so let's dive in. Enter this command to install Visual Studio Code. Winget will download the application installer and install Visual Studio Code for you. Next, we'll dive into how to install SQL Server Management Studio, your control center for everything SQL Server. Enter the Winget install command to install SSMS. Like Visual Studio Code, Winget will download the installer package and install it for you. Each release of SQL Server Management Studio requires that it be run on a specific version of Windows. If you have an older version of Windows, you should make sure that version is compatible by checking the requirements on the official SSMS download page. The link to that is in the description. If you want to learn more about using Winget to manage your Windows software, you should check out this video where I walk you through how to get started using Winget. And what's a development environment without some data to play with? We'll set up sample databases to get you started. You will be restoring 2 sample databases. These are fantastic for learning SQL Server and trying out different SQL queries. They are both provided by Microsoft and designed to help users learn and demonstrate SQL Server features. Realistic and comprehensive examples of an enterprise data model covering various business aspects such as sales, production, and human resources. Both the AdventureWorks and WorldWideImporters databases can be downloaded from the Microsoft SQL Server Samples GitHub repository. We will be restoring both of these databases from their backup files. The backup files are located on the releases page for both databases. The links are in the description. Scroll down to the OLTP Full Database Backups section of the page. We want to restore the latest version of AdventureWorks, which is AdventureWorks 2022. Click the link to download the backup file. Now we'll download the WorldWideImporters sample database. Click the link for the full backup to download the file. Navigate to your Downloads folder. We will be copying our backup files to our Backups folder that we created when we installed SQL Server. We will be restoring the backups from that folder. Select both backup files and copy. Then navigate to the backup folder located in the root directory that you created on installation of SQL Server. Paste the backup files in that folder. Next, we'll restore the backups to get our databases. We will be restoring the backups in SSMS. First, we'll open SSMS and connect to our SQL Server instance. Then, we'll click on the New Query button to open a new query window. We'll be using the command here to restore the database. Then we'll click the Execute button to restore the database. Let's get started. Open your Start menu and search for SQL Server Management Studio. When you find it, open it. When you open SSMS, it will ask you to log into your SQL Server. The easiest way to do that is to click the drop-down for server name and select Browse for more. Expand Database Engine under Local Servers and select your SQL Server instance. Click the OK button. Enable Trust Server Certificate. We are using Windows Authentication to log in. Click the Connect button to log into your SQL Server instance. If you expand the Databases node, you'll see that you don't have any databases yet. We will be restoring our sample databases now. Click the New Query button to open a query window. We are now ready to restore our databases. Using the Restore Database command, we are going to restore our backup file located in our backup folder. Using the backup file, we are going to move our data and our log files to their respective folders. Click the Execute button to restore the database. We have just restored our first database. The WorldWideImporters database includes different SQL features than AdventureWorks and includes 2 additional files that will need to be restored. However, we are still restoring the backup file located in our backup directory, moving our data file and log file to their respective directories. Click the Execute button to restore the database. And it has been restored as well. Click the Refresh button on the Databases node, and you will now see both sample databases are available. AdventureWorks and WorldWideImporters are now part of your SQL environment. We've installed SQL Server and restored the 2 sample databases. Now it's time to configure Visual Studio Code to work with our SQL Server. Click your Start menu and search for Visual Studio Code. When you find it, open it. After opening Visual Studio Code, open the Extensions view by navigating to View, Extensions. You should install 2 extensions. These tools make working with SQL Server incredibly easy right from the start with no extra configuration needed. In the search bar, type SQL to find them. SQL Server transforms Visual Studio Code into a robust SQL Server development environment. It enables you to connect to your SQL Server databases, run queries, and view results, all within the comfort of Visual Studio Code. And SQL Database Projects simplifies your database development. It helps you manage SQL projects, version control your database schema, and deploy changes seamlessly. It's perfect for keeping your database organized and up to date with minimal effort. Install both of these extensions by clicking the Install button on each of their pages. After installing both extensions, you are now ready to connect to SQL Server in Visual Studio Code. Navigate to View, Open View, and select SQL Server to add a connection. Click the Add Connection button. We are going to give our profile name AdventureWorks. Use the import type of parameters. Add your server name. Enable Trust Server Certificate. We're going to use Windows Authentication. And we are going to point to our AdventureWorks database. Change Encrypt to Mandatory and click Connect. You now have a connection to your AdventureWorks database that you added in SSMS. Let's create our first query. Right-click on AdventureWorks and select New Query. This will open a new query window. It's always a good practice to explicitly set the database that you're working with. You can use the use statement to do that. The database name should follow that statement. Scroll down to the person table and expand it. Expand the columns node. These are the columns that are in the person table. We are going to write a query to get the first and last name for all people in the persons table. Follow along as we create our first query. We are selecting the first name and the last name from the person table in our AdventureWorks database. Click the Execute Query button to run our query. You should now have a fully working SQL environment in Visual Studio Code, where you can connect to your databases, run queries, and view results without leaving the editor. Now you've got your SQL Server development environment fully set up, optimized, and ready to roll. If this was your first time tackling an installation like this, especially using the command line, I hope this guide made it all just a little bit easier. So what's next? Click this link to watch my video where I show you how to query data using the SQL select statement. And if you're excited to learn more about SQL, then I've got tons of tips, tricks, and tutorials coming your way. Do you have questions or need more help? Drop a comment below and let's get the conversation started. Thanks for watching and taking one more step to transform your curiosity into expertise.